Jagi Chunin Gibe Chokan Cholam Tanje Sange Chopa Choran Sogi Chonam Janju Badu Jagi Gapsuchi Jagi Chunin Gibe Chokan Cholam Tanje Sange Chopa Chonam Lo Janju Badu Jagi Gapsuchi Jagi Chunin Gibe Chokan Cholam Tanje Sange Chopa Tayata Gate Gate Tara Gate Tara Sum Gate Tayata Gate Gate Tara Gate Tara Sum Gate Ta Gate Gate Tara Sum Gate
심지어 탐제가 또 톱잘라나 마치마 산제 고마를 뭐지 진내자 토발자 뒤에서 다 자주서 말람자는 수시도 냥돌랑게 라원래 신고를 심어를推고 토발을 저지 좀 많어 가지고도 아니 가서 봐봐도 다 간자 로종기兄弟 얘기 삼점째.
So we set our motivation to do whatever we possibly can to attain the fearless state of enlightenment, knowing that to attain such a state, I must perfect all the trainings on the Bodhisattva path. To perfect those trainings in turn, I must have a good understanding of what they are about. And I gain this by being able to study an unmistaken text, an unmistaken presentation of what they are. And I am here this morning to listen to such a teaching on the mind training series of teachings. And so that as we began last week, we will visualize during the course of this teaching in the space in front of us either the figure of the Buddha or Chen Rezig, or indeed whichever we have an affinity towards. That is the space, and they are in those aspects, but in actuality, of course, representing our own root wound.
Yeah, what did I say? That jealous is said, I'm not jealous Chadon in that. Yana Casa Chachiba in that. Taka jealous that Rigmida Mabushu Jogudwa. The cars so set up in a Susan just set up. What did I say?
Music system has been turned off.
So yes, so that's but if, for example, you pick the figure of Chen Rezig to visualize, that can be any of the many varied forms of Chen Rezig, be it the 1,000-arm figure of Chen Rezig or Avalokiteshvara, or the 4-armed, etc.
What did it say? What did it say? Tapina on the coast, but the Chashi was set up, jealous Chashi was set up, Chashi set up, what did it say? And the Chashi about the and was to Joe on Jama, Tuga Hu, Yovachi, Komashe, and the Tuga Hule, we said part of member to the Shingram Dara never, and Ishiba Chanta, Ishiba only the Jama Chanta, and Ishiba, and Takacha, because that that's about jealousy, Chashi the party, and only uncle, and Jaguabami Uti. What did you come share? What did
And so that, for example, if we're visualizing the 4-armed Chen Rezig in the space in front, then we see that the one that we are visualizing is marked by the syllables hong at the crown, at the throat, and at the heart. And then light emanates from that hong at the heart through to the pure realms, inviting all of the wisdom beings who come and dissolve into that figure, and they are now fully empowered.
And there are rangi tago de rangi tinje ma ge simje tanje ma so me ba yu samja and simje de da tanje ja ru su de ngai no shi ba na ba na ka se min ne shi nam ju yu ge and de ne chi ge da ga ja lama and jealous la and be 당에 때와 이식에 때와 모두가 때와 요팅은 저 어떤 데지 라운드 총팅은 저 어떤 데지 공부시
And that we are surrounded ourselves by all kinds of other sentient beings. They're all representative of all the 6 realms of cyclic existence, but in aspect looking human and able to cognize in that sense. And so, like us, they are looking towards the figure in the space in front of Ten Rezig with the sense of that triple faith, the faith of a pure faith, of manifest faith, and the faith of conviction.
아니 랑 가서다 다 근데 지금 가서다 다데 데 가서다 뭐래 다 라마 제레스라 미베 아니 고선도 연대잖아 딜라미베 대바 아니 지금 가서다 심자라 미베 심자 대다 탐자이자 아니 대화 두고다 대화 폭 밑에 뭐 동아리 때 토도 봐봐 근데 지금 아니 공부시했잖아 심자를 닝제 어디를 좀 공부시
So from our point of view, we have that same sense of faith in the figure of Ten Rezig, looking towards by recalling the qualities of the enlightened being of Ten Rezig, and also in our contemplation of the sentient beings and all the 6 realms of existence all around us. We see how they are so desperate for happiness, but are bereft of that happiness. They desperately wanting to avoid the suffering that they are inundated with. And so with that understanding, we have a natural arising compassion for all of the sentient beings.
어디를 아니 되나다 저 소사 진짜잖아 다 반제 저 찬자와다 최샤와 저서 그 저다 저 탐자다 저 탐자다 전주 친구 워 소안나 신전에 다 그지 저 차체에 아니 저 고송 급여고에 차체에 아니 저 가서 차체와다 아니 랑게 아니 저 가서 처방 무엇을 샤마다 아니 다간 저 랑게 주소도 잡이 계산되거든 최발을追的 동성고 동치가 지금 강화된 데 쇼업이네 뭐도 조사 진짜체 저 어디를
Then we engage in the practices of purification of negativity and the accumulation of positive merit. And this can be done in conjunction with the 7-limbed practice, where we begin with the prostration or paying of homage through a body, speech, and mind, then the making of offerings like that are directly in front of us, that we have arranged for ourselves, but also that we can cultivate through our own imagination, so that we have this sense of making limitless offerings.
我的大亚拉东么面对的这么偏呢，大概就是拉不那送的现在我这个恐怕写着呢，俺这个告诉了偏呢，俺得到不了的呢，俺错个心了，突就了电话中，电话东北街，这都就是没一些结束，真的恐怕写出来也不要了，我真的想。
And so, we go through the other limbs of that practice, being the confession and purification of negativities, and rejoicing, requesting the Buddhas not to enter into parinirvana, but to stay and teach and to make our dedication, etc. And in conjunction with the instructions in the graduated path teachings, the offering of these 7 limbs and the mandala practice, etc., all offered to the merit field. This, in this case, represented by a Chen Rezi. And so that there is this response within the merit field of having been very pleased by these offerings. They experience bliss, which combines with voidness, and they abide in the wisdom of non-dual bliss and voidness. This is quite auspicious.
我的了这，大概你现在这个告诉的，那么接着这个要明的，你要这个做工钱呢，做工钱就是这个呢，做工没钱，我的了这
And if possible, then to be able to focus single-pointedly as much as possible on that figure of Chen Rezig at this stage with placement meditation.
我真的是，呀，搞不了，呀，那么接着这个，就我这么图个，就我一个上了明的，呀，大概了明着呀，明白下，我的了这
Then and then we can bring our focus also on the 3 syllables of Om Ah Hong, and that in this particular case we try to focus initially on the Om at the crown, and just try to get precisely just keep our focus on just that Om.
我真明白上，俺的让他给他个的 심지 탐색에 집어리 이거 전부 두가 공유 그 공부해 뭐 들었죠.
And that all of the sentient beings all around us are similarly marked by the three syllables home.
안다 omla 미과 샤데 om텔레 아니 이제 저 미과 샤오데 om레 위에서 om파도 매버 트레테 om파도 매버 트 안에 라다 랑 타고 심지 탐색 om라 파팀 삼사체 om라 파팀 삼사체 om라 파팀 발레테네 랑기타 류코노 소체바 아니 마지발렘바 아니 로엠다 다 지금 미사와 줘발라 소베 아니 되게 네바사바 세텔라 사바 생가마 대가마 토마메바 사베 디바가 나니니 저는 아니 류기다 이거 요새 그건 마 되는척 상단 이거 요새가 법이 부가 탐자 마 되는지 나니니 되는지도 어디로 공부하셔
And that then, so in focusing on the now, we see that light rays begin to emanate from that at the crown of Chenrezig, and light rays there of countless so countless of the syllable also emanating out and entering into the at our own crown and the crown of all the sentient beings into the there as well, and thereby beginning the process of purification of all negativities accumulated by the body, like physically engaged in negativities such as killing and stealing and sexual misconduct. And so that these are completely purified, and you can feel that they deal with those particular negativities accrued during this life, during our previous lives, and indeed from all our lives since beginningless time. And we have the certainty that all of that negativity in the form of dark kind of a liquid is kind of purified out through the lower openings of our body.
아니 야 가브리 엔 템베 아딜라 미과찬 아랑라 미과찬 미과 샤와를 때는 아드나 랑다 빠도 매버트네 랑게 아니 데 랑다 랑게 타고 먹을 심지 탐제 이게 랑다 아딜라 마 빠도 매버 팀네 디스크리션 세그라 마 팀네 아니 디 팀발을 때는 딱 나고는 싸봐 그 참아 세속 나젤라서 세대am 생각만 토마 매버스 디바디가도 나니니 바다다게 진짜 법이 부가는 봐 되는지 삼사 어디로 공부하셔
Next, we bring our focus to the at the throat of the figure of Chenrezig, and now light rays containing countless syllable as are emanating from that at the throat, entering into the as at the throats of ourselves and all mother sentient beings. And this time, dealing with all of the verbal negativities that we have engaged in, such as lying and harsh speech, divisive speech, and idle gossip, etc. And that, again, we have the certainty that these negativities are really being purified in connection with what we have accumulated in this life, in previous lives, and indeed all lives since beginningless time. And similarly so, we have the symbolic kind of a certainty of that purification through the liquid which is leaving through our lower orifices.
다가는 되네 두가게 아니 가서 홍들라 야미 과톤 야 홍래 다 홍빠도 매버 트네 홍빠도 매버 트네 아니 랑다랑 더 심지 탐되게 두가 홍들라 파팀네 팀네 아니 이거는 다 낙셈 뇌셈 록달라 소베 되게 이거는 사베 디보다 세다 생각만 나타 통하면서 디보다가 나니 되죠 something 어디로 공부하시네
And next we bring that focus onto the hung at the heart center of Chenrezig. And now the hung, countless hungs together with the white light begin to emanate from that heart center, from the hung at the heart center, entering into the hungs at the heart centers of myself and all other sentient beings. And this time really directed at all of the mental negativity. So, for example, covetousness and malicious intent and wrong view. And again, we have this kind of a certainty of the efficacy of this purification process, such that all of this negativity that we have accumulated in this life and previous lives, and right through to beginningless time, we feel are now completely purified.
당연히 다 지워 저마 두가 숨가를 믹전 숨가를 왜서 빠도 매버 쳤네. 그래서 가마 팀서 빠도 매버 쳤네. 란다 다가도 거기서 지워 저마 두가 혼을 좀 때네. 아니 다 류가 예수께 사회 바자 되게 가 나니 되지네. 다 매버 차소 삼사체 어떻게
And so now we bring our focus to onto all of the three syllables simultaneously, hum. And again, the light rays emanate very powerfully from the hum on Chenrezig, entering into the hum and dissolving into the hum on ours and all other sentient beings' bodies. And this time also purifying the remnants of the negativities of body, speech, and mind, but especially also all the imprints that accompany those negativities. To feel that they are dealing very effectively with these imprints.
다 되게 되거든. 지금 바자죠. 마나니 좀 되게데. 아니 미네 랑게 되네. 아니 배 지금 싹마 가서 또 개전 되게 띵띵들라 이제 치다 신제 가당 되게 삼다 아니 뒤딱 뭐만 매워 봤어요 이 때문에 아니 가당에 매워 차수 삼다 오마든 아니 내가 도지 자람 삼다 아니 사데 수팅네 다 가서다 다 지금 어디에 치다 뒤쪽도 삼다 전 딱한 제 지금 가서래 다 지금 최초에게 장주 대바치 비추고 냠내 제발라 다 친나 상속에 아니 개개시
We can also include the visualization of all of the stuff of our negativities when it leaves our bodies, that it moves down through a crack in the earth below us, and below that is the gaping mouth of Yama, the Lord of Death, who is swallowing all of this negativity and is indeed quite satisfied by all of this negativity. So we feel that this is all cleared completely into the jaws of Yama, the Lord of Death. And at the conclusion, that we see that mouth closing over, and we seal it with a double dorje, and then we see also the earth kind of moving over again and becoming complete on top. And so we have this really a certainty that this is incredibly symbolic for us in terms of our efforts on the Mahayana vehicle, or how to accomplish the different realizations on that path, that we have all of the conducive conditions to be able to do this and to persist and so on, such as having a long life free of illness and so on.
어떻게 고바시 어떻게 안디 세두블레 팽고 요래 랑게 세두블레 팽고 요래 아니 냠레 레플레 디바드 다 어떻게 요거
So yes, it's said to be very auspicious for having a longer life, especially one that is dedicated to accomplishing the Mahayana ideals.
어때 다다네 아니 다나 라마 제레스는 랑게 지볼라 아니 때마다 니마다 다베 된 고바시 딱 연조 자세 양답에 따와 가서 주변에 시체 아니 고바시네 아니 제 젠더는 빨리서 라마를 다기 지워 빼면서 같이 좀 구조도 무르서 당배 봐서 빼 니베 가서 수배 가서 때도 산제 고마마도 그때 제 송송서에 가고 어떻게
And next, we prepare a seat for the invitation of the main figure in our merit field, the figure of Chenrezig, to come and sit on our crown. And so we establish the lotus sun and moon disk mandala seat through the contemplations on renunciation, the view of emptiness, and the theory of bodhicitta, as we have explained before. And then we make the invocation verse, "O glorious and precious root Guru, come take your lotus and moon seat placed here on my crown. Keep me safe in your kindness. Bestow on me the attainments of body, speech, and mind." And at the end of the first recitation, that figure begins the journey towards us. at the end of the second, comes to the seat on our crown at the end of the third, is now established there steadfastly until we attain the state of enlightenment. We have that assurance, and we can really gain some joy and rejoice in that fact.
다 가스면 다다지 저 가사 그걸로서 시바들 그래
Die 직제 니바디겠나?
니바들
니바디 년기 쪽라 도착 주냐
라스 뭐야 다들 저 다가제 지금 네 게세 그 줘봤대 다가제 거소래다 자주 선배게 냠내 제원도 냠내 제원도 다 심지어 탐제도 돈 산제 고마도도 예배게 냠내 제원도 다 간제 지금 가소래다 지금 근데 냠내데 아니 차차와 야고 정말다 제 추억 간에 있네 아니 지금 냠내들만 냠내데 아니 다 조도 맞히고요 대견세 통계 두개지 제고요 가서나 자주 생각 냠내스데 삼바 자체와 삼바자체와 가서나 아타이가 막게 심지어 탐제라 파바주베겠다 꿀웅게 심마치고요 미바 자체와 다그 가서 심지어 탐제 동mel에 대두고요 저다 자체보다 심지어 탐제 찍니 말에 심지어 탐제 진짜 말로 봐 산제가 살아 그에 저다데 님도 자체와 다 심지어 찍라 팽고 여봐 이나양 심지어 찍라 팽바지 좋아 이봐 이나양 아니 지금 냐웬데서 개만에 개라봐도 내보내 내기 삼삼 어떻게 님도 보고요 뒤 자체와데 조금 말해 뒤 자체 코 마동을 봐도 셈제가 되는 적이 있어 코 마동을 봐도 셈제가 되는 거 어디다 내게 로아다 님도 보나 삼바 자체와 미과 자체와 아니 뒤 자체 뭐 아니 가서 님도 자체 뭐뒤 자체 근데 지금 되는 다 되게 지금도 아니 초 강간이다 지금 가서 자주 쓰면 냠내는 저번 제고요 봐 제것도 다 초용전에 삼로 깡도 같이 보고도 와 초용전에
So this is a text concerned with the practices of the bodhisattva, and we will in the course of this we come to understand really how vast in many different ways that those practices are and that attitude is, and that the kind of the whole, how do you say, the essence of a bodhisattva practice must necessarily employ every possible means to advance that thought and those practices. And so it's said to have, on the one hand, this attitude, a very vast attitude or intention, in that it's the mind is concerned with leading all sentient beings to the state of enlightenment. And so this is kind of like a vastness in terms of motivation. It also has this this kind of a certain vastness in terms of its object, and this is kind of because it's focused on all sentient beings, again, without leaving anybody out, without exceptions, without any discrimination. And so it's got this vast object, and it's a vast meaning. And again, the meaning behind it, you know, that the import of taking on such a vast attitude and a vast object is, you know, cannot be in any way diminished or in any way trivialized. And so it's kind of vast in terms of that meaning. And it's vast in terms of the courage that is necessary to really fulfill this ideal of the mind of enlightenment. And that this means that one is prepared to, even for the sake of one sentient being, spend eons and eons in the hell realms, if that is the case, if that is truly the case, that they will be benefited. And so that's kind of really the ability to take on a great deal in order to help one sentient being. So it's got that profundity of courage there too. And in terms of the vastness of time, again, that one is taking on this vast time span that may be necessary in order to fulfill this particular goal, and that may include until psychic existence itself is emptied. And so one has to kind of really have a good take, a good understanding of the huge kind of like import of taking on this practice of the bodhisattvas. So this is kind of really saying then that because of that, we must be prepared to use every possible quality that we have, every possible opportunity that is offered to us, every possible situation that we find ourselves in order to always advance this mind of enlightenment. So we had stopped at the start of verse 2 of the text, so we will read that now. Attached to your loved ones, you're stirred up like water. Hating your enemies, you burn like fire. In the darkness of confusion, you forget what to adopt and discard. Give up your homeland. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So this verse is pointing out the main point of some understanding that, when we are kind of like associated with our place of birth, our homeland, as it were, that we can develop, these kind of connections with everybody in that area, and that they will be, predicated on the attachment to some and aversion towards others. And both of these kind of discriminations are clearly and very definitely obstacles to being able to develop the vastness of the mindset that is necessary for a bodhisattva practice. And so here one should understand that, this is the how to say, the context of course has to be understood here, that the verse is really discouraging attachment and aversion here, not necessarily discouraging us from remaining in our homeland. It's just saying that the necessary conditions that come along with being at home is that you will have more occasions for attachment and aversion. And so in the bigger context, that you have to have no attachment or aversion to any sentient being. And so you have to kind of develop that and put yourself into conducive conditions where you can thereby develop that attitude of complete non-discrimination. So it's clear to distinguish here. If you are in a situation where there is no risk to attachment or aversion, even in your homeland, there's no reason to leave your homeland in that case, because you are dealing with the main issue of really uprooting any attachment or aversion. I think it's immediately recognizing in this verse that the kind of a fragility of the beginner's mind in wanting to uproot all attachment and aversion, and it's saying that in that case one should really take oneself away from a place where the conducive conditions for the arising of attachment and aversion are very prevalent. And so it's kind of like, we know ourselves that in a certain situation as beginners, all we need to do is to be in that kind of environment where, the conditions are met with, and immediately we have our discriminating attitude of attachment to in one moment and aversion in the other. So it's kind of saying to protect that beginner's mind, one needs to take oneself away from the environment in which those conditions are very prevalent. So, again, I'm saying obviously what is absolutely key, quintessential in this kind of practice is to develop mindfulness and alertness, to understand the conditions that can give rise to attachment and aversion, to have then the prescience of mind through our mindfulness and alertness to cognize that when it arises, to recognize the moments that when attachment and aversion arise, and thereby to counteract them and abandon them. And so this is what's important, because if you don't have that training in mindfulness and alertness, and even if you leave your homeland, as it's stated in the verse, you still will be very prone to discriminating through attachment and aversion in the new place that you find yourself in. Even if you go far, far away, it just becomes another homeland of attachment and aversion, as Gimla says, because you haven't learned to deal with it through recognizing, through mindfulness and alertness. So that's the issue, key issue. But developing these mental factors is extremely important.
야 고지질에 뒤에 인 저그래 고지질라 야 안에 제 말아두고 저기 가서도 퇴바체 아니 가서도 퇴바체 삼바체 아니 되는 겁니다 아니 지 가서래 다 가자 저기 랑게 현자 제사게다 유드네 제네 아니 내 엄발 땐다 가자 저기 두바 세지도 지고래 그래서 때들 고쳐 그래 바유 세 저봐 남주 소소 내서 되네 아니 지도 되네 파다 유네 아니 세다 두번 년 받잖아 다 간제 다 거서 엄바텐데 중국으로 닦아자 파유 육성 된델로 고쳐라 닦아자 두바 쪼제 와 다다고 저거 최고 롭종의 롭종제는 다시 아니 간장 다 도와페나 제네 닦아자 저거 당고 베나 자샤와이나 저거 베나 고 셰럽 도와다 제바제 자주 생각나는데 셰럽 도와다 제바 제고도 아니 제네 아니 셰럽 도와다 제바 제네 다 냠네 제고도 아니 제바 제 제바 제네 닦아자 당고 제 가서도 아니 저거 다 전생의 로또 소리 저바이나 다 로또이나 아니 로또도 맞아 태좀 갈라래 아니 태좀에 이슈 잠게 고아차 이슈 잠게 고아차바도 오다 배제 딜레샤 삼서 아니 딜라 아니 체매 잠게 고아차다 저거 좀쟁 삼로다 체매 잠게 고아차 로 동고숨도 가서도 가서 체매 잠게 고아차 아니 가서도 녀바니 아니 되네다 되네 녀바니베 되들다 되네 샤마샤바잖아다 아니 검증을 시작하면 깨닫잖아요. 검잠다. 제가 차서 다 되는 전다까지 주변 다 제주도 냠내 집으로 어떻게든 고쳐버릴 정도.
아니 디 그래서 파율 대야야 아니 디 공정내기 샤랍디 그냥 그래서 디
맞다. 파유 가서 파유 방어 개설하는 딱 근데 남주 거도 지도를 내는 이제 대대 줘봐다. 다이나 지도를 내는 이제 대대 딱 가자 지금 문에 전에 그 잠깐 저다 저거 유 예반예배 유대 다 유스는 딱 가자 다 소소 냠내 제 아니 새도 다 무슨도 또 와제발다 엄바때네 다 검자고로다.
아
검자고로 와 왔다 된대지겠다 된대 내잖아 양고 받제 또 주고 요 인사 된대 고쳐 매다다 미세 근데잖아 미세 나가자 다 개치슈되다 착당을 높아야 돼 다 된다 되셔 착당을 높이 마슈촌다 다이스 된다 징그레
And so again, is saying that though, of course, here the main focus of this verse is the eradication of attachment and aversion. We can also understand it in the context of somebody who is into serious practice and really searching for realization in those terms. And so it's kind of, you can see obviously that to be able to reside in an isolated place, free of the distractions of homeland and everything associated with homeland, is going to be very conducive, to be able to really go through the different wisdoms arising from study, from contemplation, and then ultimately, through that.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Hello again. We can still hear you. We just can't hear Noel.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So.
What that is fair.
So sorry everybody, I had a big drop out there.
No problem.
That's it.
No worries, no worries.
I tried to isolate myself from attachment and aversion, maybe, but yeah. So again, I was pointing out that this verse deals with that sort of idea of moving yourself kind of like outside of the conditions for attachment and aversion. That in terms of somebody who's like serious practitioner as well, who wants to meditate in that sense and retreat, obviously it's necessary to remove yourself from any kind of distractions as much as possible. And you go through that process of using what you've learned, the wisdom from learning, and then the wisdom from contemplation, which is here concentrating on, the analytical meditation that goes into dealing with the stuff, the data of what you've assimilated from the teachings, the doubts that you have over that, overcoming those doubts, reaching a kind of a certain sense of conviction with regard that using a valid reasoning, and then you enter into the meditation and gain that wisdom arising from meditation. So saying in the context of that, the kind of a more serious practice, that obviously it says that you need to really have a kind of an isolation a place of isolation free from the normal distractions of life. But the main import of the verse is still dealing with just the normal attachments and aversions that we have when we're around the familiar. So again, I'm saying yes. So in terms of the Mahayana practitioner, it's always the issue of really isolating ourselves from attachment and aversion, and not necessarily from our homeland, because that would be kind of impossible if everybody took it on anyway. And so the next verse is extremely, very much connected with what Ben has just pointed out as well. And I'll read it. By avoiding bad objects, disturbing emotions gradually decrease. Without distraction, virtuous activities naturally increase. With clarity of mind, conviction in the teaching arises. Cultivate seclusion. This is the practice of bodhisattvas. So the term here for object is kind of saying, you know, that again, to never lose sight of the key point in these verses, and that is really that to gain whatever advantage we have in terms of conducive conditions in order to combat the mental afflictions. And here, talking about attachment and aversion in particular. And that, but so what we need to understand is that, you know, what, in terms of saying by avoiding bad objects, disturbing emotions gradually decrease. What we're talking about here is an object is not necessarily good or bad in itself. It becomes bad if it is that which is going to increase our mental afflictions, our disturbing emotions. And if it's something that it helps to decrease our disturbing emotions, it can be a good object, a sound object. And so this is the distinction that always must be made in terms of, you know, how literally we take these verses and so on. We must understand that here, the mind of attachment is a dangerous enemy when it comes to advancing our spiritual life. And so that we have to take a careful attitude with regard to what objects and so on, what we surround ourselves with.
was kege and the kege about what tribute and it might give us auto enough, might give by Yana never you to the year to what that's no more rim my trip to dress my trip. And now maybe that no more my teacher and the same young Saturday shoot from the Togua. Nami maybe and so gave a choke together and compared to total Nangi Pep. And it because of that Tatangi and it that because number the shoot on the because of that and it report Tango report what gave a choke about the because of the report Tango on the Machute, report Tango and it chilling a shake. What the day was that the day you get and it cheat and get about this about the and guess a lot is because you which is that jet to because of that because of the you did that jet to and no more to you ever then there's no more get to the 요모 계사 깨는다 제도 제바 인다 어바때바 제바는 가서 레던 거라 다디 개체 못해서 개서 날리니 소트.
And so then this is kind of in one sense pointing out the obvious to us in terms of understanding that, anything that is going to increase the disturbing emotions is a negative object in the context of this verse. So if we avoid those bad objects, then disturbing emotions gradually decrease. And that without distraction, virtuous activities naturally increase. And that if with clarity of mind, conviction in the teaching arises. So I'm saying here, like regarding ourselves as beginners, again, and understanding that, we are very much inundated, or as it were, we have the mental afflictions quite embedded in our mindsets. And that if then we meet with any of the myriad of conditions, then that particular mental affliction will arise readily. And so we need to really cultivate this sense of seclusion, as it says here, in order then to be able to kind of look clearly at what is going to be conducive to being able to avoid mental affliction on the one hand, and then that opens up the possibility of cultivating the virtuous activities, as they say here, as well as the conviction in the Dharma. So it's kind of like a common sense of putting oneself in a position where one is going to benefit the mind, and that this is the practice of the Bodhisattva. And then verse number 4, it says, loved ones who have long kept company will part. Wealth created with difficulty will be left behind. Consciousness, the guest, will leave the guest house of the body. Let go of this life. This is the practice of bodhisattvas.
아니 소셜 류 컨텐츠 요바 있네 류 상보다 컨텐츠 요바 있네 아니 류도 소셜 남자가 정하는 시제 아니 다 저보다 니마지 정하는 시간 저걸 왔다 저거랬어 근데 이마에서 세트라 시고지 착점 제 대화는 아니 주주 돌았던 게 됐다 냠내 제주고 말했어 딱 가서 미닝불라 제주고 말했어 니뭐 렌토고 말해 근데 이마에서 세들 류 당서 세들 매버서 뭐 세들 개체 뭐 시고지 때에 발려 당소스 세디 개체 뭐 시고지 때에 이나 아니 또다 뭐 시고 주투 얘기를 받지 지금 됐어 좋아 근데 저 세들 류 당서 제 고말서 뭐 세디 개체 뭐 때에 발려 당소스 지제만 니께서 나는 참 됐어 다 집에 낚시에 더해 그러니까 세대 낚시에 더해 중국도 와
So this verse number 4 is looking into the great disadvantage of being attached to this life, of considering this life to be so important. And it's saying, look at what we can say definitely about this life, that loved ones who you have long kept company with will part. You will be separated. You will be separated from them. You will be separated from your belongings, from your wealth, from that which you are so attached to. It all must be left behind. Even the guest house of your body will be left behind by the guest of consciousness. And so therefore, let go of this life. Now, it should be understood that it's not a case of just literally letting go of this life, but rather it's saying let go of attachment to the objects of desire of this life that we are so enamored with. And that's saying here that this is, of course, talking about renunciation. It's about trying to recalibrate the mind from being so obsessed with this life, from being so obsessed with the importance of every single thing in this life. And that comes from our being attached to the objects of desire of this life. It's saying you need to develop a certain renunciation so that you kind of lose that attachment, because you can see the inevitability of separation from all of that which you have held so dear. And so if you have don't do that, then you will end up with a life wasted. You will end up with a life where that was completely devoid of meaning. You will have not taken the essence of your precious human rebirth. And so it's saying, this is what you must understand. Let go of the attachment to just this life. This is the practice of bodhisattvas.
가서나 되게 차과디 아니 차과디게 아니 동양수보다 먼저 합다라 차과디 두고요 상사도와 얘네야 차과디라 때네 아니 디 마주와이나 아니 동양용 되지 다들 착세 매바이나 아니 좋아이나야 배주 땅줄에 마주나 이마이나야 대도 강에 요금은 도와
So it's kind of like we need to come to the understanding that attachment means suffering, and that here, it's kind of like it isn't so obvious to us, but it is that deceptive notion that we think we are getting something by gaining the object of our attachment, but it's a deceptive thing, because of course it will always lead to suffering. And so we have to develop this kind of a discipline of mind where we don't become so attached to anything. And so therefore, if we get it, there is that, it can be a safe sense of satisfaction. But if we don't manage to get it, then there is no suffering that comes along with that sense of regret or sense of not getting what we really wanted. And so that's the important thing here, to really understand what the nature of attachment is, and it is that of suffering.
또 뭐다 말아도 배는 찾아와이나 말아도 배는 찾아나 배나 가서 미치게 소소라 아니 구샵제 그 소소 레와 카와이나 아니 미테 구샵 마체와이나 소소 기본 요금은 도와 기본 마요데 미테 구샵 마체와 좀 전에 기본 매버냐 말이 기본 마요한테 소속이 구샵 제 레와 카다 요거 도와 그 구샵 마체바데 이 말에 미셔바치게 레와 매겐디게 구샵 마체바이나 구샵 마체바네 기본 매버 요구로 와 이 요금은 도와 레와 디 구샵 지그래서 레와 매겐데 구샵 마체나 강에 요 말에 디 구샵 지그래서 레와 요겐데 구샵 마체나 강에 요래 디 간저 레와 디 소고다 구샵 마체바데 니가 찍봐라 구샵 마체바 찍봐라 얘네 찍으라 요거도 간저 소서 레와 디 소고다.
For example, in the context of attachment, when we have the expectation of respect from another person, and they don't show that respect, that brings suffering to the mind. And then we think, they are disrespectful. I deserve disrespect, and that that there is no fault in the other person. The fault is in one's own expectation of respect. And so this is where we must make that distinction. Another person who does not have that expectation may also not receive respect, but they don't suffer because of that. They don't suffer because they didn't have the expectation of respect in the first place. Both examples are the same. Neither received respect. One is in a state of frustration and anger because of their expectation, and the other is still quite calm because they had no expectation of respect. So this is where attachment can be very damaging.
네, 다 뒤에서 나라도 삼성 미팅이 아는 나라 구샵 제마서 삼사제 대마교 미팅이라도 소소 라와디 제도 가서 사이콜로지컬 왜 와 삼로도 전에 다디 하고에도 개쳐버려도 안 돼서 소소라 동네 되고 뭐더라 대라와 맞잖아 두개 요거 말아
so this might happen, that when you say, oh, that person didn't give me the necessary respect, and that you can kind of like look into that see how that impacts your equilibrium of mind, and see how you're upset because of that. Look into the psychology of it and go, oh, also that's a suffering there, and I have to kind of recognize then, oh, that came from a sort of almost a hidden expectation of respect that I had big hopes for from that person. And so you have to understand that I can do something about this. If I didn't have the expectation, I wouldn't have this pinching of my mind, the suffering in my mind, and so therefore you make that necessary adjustment.
다 되는 뭐다 아니 세대 디게다 세계 디게도 소소라와 시월이 잡대와 이나 세대 디게를 창선 잡아이나 디마저나 섬나 강에 되죠. 이나다 가리 있나면나 뭐서 개배절라 다 치워야 치워게봐 남진님의 치외서 치면도 간기 미배마 다가자 로아다가자데 로아 미배마 인자다 아니 다 잡아 숨고를 와 최제바 다 잡아 아니 최단한의 잡아 다 잡아 아니 가서데 아니 저 가서다 최단한 제자자 아니 가서데 아니 가서 최 바시 주에 다지 왔다 되게 가서데 다지 가서데 다가자 좀 전보다 다 잡아 숨다 다 되고 거네 다지 남리 나서에 좀 왔다 되게 다 최주바 다지 최주에다 단단한 주바 다지 와 안디야 최 바시 주에 다지 왔다 다저 숨 제수 왔다 되게 강가데 다 지금 봉투 바시 보고요 어디래
So you simply apply this kind of reasoning to all of that which we have expectation of in this life, that we have the sense of, kind of investing our attachment into what we want, what we like to have, what we, want to get. And that, and then of course, you see the suffering that comes along with that when you cannot, get what you want, or you can't get it when you want it. And so all this frustration that comes from that attachment, that can be avoided by really dealing with the kind of expectation of that we put into everything anyway. So it's kind of very, very important in this context. This is where the teachings on death and impermanence in the form of death are so important, as laid out in the graduated path. How, we see death is definite, but at the time of death is indefinite. But that also at the time of death, only our spiritual practice will be of benefit to us. And it talks about having contemplated on those three aspects of death, we come up with, three definitive conclusions. And that by contemplating how death is definite, I must then therefore now engage in spiritual practice, because this is so important. And then contemplating how death is indefinite. That sort of risk element then should impel us to say, right, the conclusion here is that I must not procrastinate any further, but engage in spiritual practice right now. Starting from now, I really get serious about my practice. And then having contemplated how at the time of death, only our spiritual practice will be of benefit, the conclusion we come to is that, right, now I must dedicate myself solely to spiritual practice. I must really up the ante again and kind of really get serious about my spiritual practice. So this is a good kind of counter force to any kind of attachment that we have to this life.
Yeah, 답변 찾아 다른 것도 담을린 나로 다들 가서 관을 와레스를 되게 강하게 잡아들어. 세대 개체부 시라 마스가 밑에라 강에 대상 요 말에 다 세대 개체부 세대게 오 셈나 강에 시부지요. 또
we can see also that in the context of the coronavirus at present, as the pandemic of the world is, for those who consider, attachment to this life, and therefore, all these things become so kind of like overwhelming and important that they cause a great deal of mental suffering. But for those who have less attachment to this life, we can see that this doesn't create so much mental suffering at all in their minds.
Because 대담게 강남에 되게 스페인 찾아와이나 스페인 찾아는 출로를 답이다 킬로미터 간에 좀 다 지지 세워다 세대 계정 뭐 쉬우 쓰바이나 아니 강에서 아니 되는 거 자야다 개비 자야다 뭐 고용보다 뭐
And so you can see again that's saying, but especially, the context of this 5-kilometer rule at the moment, that you're not allowed to go any further than 5 kilometers from your house, and that those who consider this life to be all important find this tremendous kind of like suffering and insult, so much so that they're outside protesting, their human rights are being infringed upon because they can't travel more than 5 kilometers and so on. And so they really bring it. You can see the suffering there manifests very clearly. So this, teaching on lose attachment to the affairs of this life, and then onwards talking about losing attachment to future lives. And so to get this bigger picture understanding that actually it's cyclic existence. It's the very nature of cyclic existence. It's in the nature of suffering itself. And so there is nothing definite to be found in cyclic existence. No definite happiness there. So it's kind of like I have to kind of take a much broader approach here to be able to establish happiness, definite happiness, and to avoid suffering. And so I need to start contemplating the idea of overcoming cyclic existence altogether, because you can see that when you are within this reality, the causes and conditions are kind of always there, more or less, that are going to facilitate suffering.
어디 다 근데 이마에서 안다 지다 치 통계 개첨벌이다 딜레 개첨 난게 삼로그 통계 다시 우 개첨벌도 난게 삼로그 통계 되게 아니 통계 근데 지마 이내야 아니 그래서 통계 상에 근데 지마 이내야 랑게 심라 시대네 도와치 다 시대네도 뭐요 내주 심에 돈에 시대네 그러보다 뭐요 내주도 밑에 맞아 삼로 땅잖아 시대 그래서 그래 시대 용도 말봐.
And so it's just really importance of keeping a view as to the actuality of our situation, the actuality of our reality. And that is so important, this kind of 2020 vision that we should have on our situation. And as it's important as maintaining the external conditions for practice. The inner conditions of how we set our mind are more important always. And so here it's kind of saying, we need to be able to proceed so as that we are maintaining this sense of peace and well-being within in the kind of like pursuit of our spiritual goals. And that this is kind of done most efficiently and most safely by maintaining this sense of this knowing of the actuality of our situation.
먼저 섬도 다들 강에 또 책이 요래 강에 또 책은 다 강에 쉬우도 무서 먼저 딜레 강에 채워대 니마지 소수가 리덴트다 같이 해주고 와 치와서 좀 치와리 강에 차지 가려요 요 말마 좋아 다들 요야 다 강에 디모도 차 매드기도 말이다 강에 코아바스 때 강에 나서 주온데 그래 아니 다른 다들 강에 채워버려 강에 채워대 강에 디 아니 취업주에 챙겨를 배주다 딜레 때는 다 년종이 깨도 맞아봐이나 내가 저 년종도 맞아봐이나 다 모두는 코아들 이제 세자들 모두는 되게 동안 모두는 용되게 아니 근데 무트는 용한데 소에 코라면도 텔레 코알레 마타나 데이터비 통에 무트는 용한테 그러 봐. 무트는 용한테 그래. 다 되네 이제 코알레 마타에는 무트는 용한데 다 코알레 탑에 탑지 맞는 저 무토스는 지금 탄적을 놓게 두에 제발이나 아니 동에 대 최저비 통계를 치면 봐.
So we can say, that for us personally, we can be easily overcome by the problems of this life, of just living a normal life. That when things go awry, we can be quickly overwhelmed by the depth, even the prevalence, the frequency of different sufferings for us. And we think that these are huge and insurmountable. But even in comparison to the greatest suffering that we can have in life, being death, these are sufferings that we should learn to really deal with much more skillfully. Death is going to be inevitable for us, and it's always part and parcel of a cyclic existence life. And so here, then we need to be able to have some better way of dealing with life when we meet with the problems that are inevitable in cyclic existence. And they are, as far as cyclic existence are concerned, there's an endless variety of such problems and difficulties that can arise. So therefore, it's far more skillful for us to be able to come up with ways in which we can use whatever arises for our spiritual practice, to be able to understand that problems should really spell renunciation for us. For example, to say, look, I need to gain definite emergence from this situation. That any rebirth in cyclic existence is going to meet with difficulties like this. And that if I don't want them, I need to really aim to gain liberation from cyclic existence altogether, because until I do, I am inevitably going to meet with such problems.
다 자주서 벨랍절라 다 됐다 말이야. 랑이 돼 냠뉴 돼 되네. 셈제 셰 동네 데이터 나올 미스 받잖아. 아니 델라 타에 아니 탐지 제가 고마 좀 시스템 고르 와 어디래.
And we can see also that this renunciation as being the quintessential insight into our own suffering is the stepping stone to being able to understand that all sentient beings are thus suffering, and so develop the attitude of compassion. The flip side of renunciation, to look into the notion that I can really up my game here to actually work for the benefit of all sentient beings in order to relieve them of the suffering that I understand so well myself, and I know that they are also going through.
그렇죠. 다들 이제 다들 나한테 걸 점을 용도를 강에 태대야지. 아니 랑이 자주가 셈기에 심지 탐제도 평바 주에. 아다 되네 심지 탐제 아니 산제 고아 마도 마이나. 양 타밤 탐제 기에 고마 마도 무트네 다 대다 저 강에 망고 용고 요바데. 아니 못 잡았잖아. 아니 디 자주가 셈 닌지게다. 들려들 자주가 셈기에다. 된데라 아니 냐면 제도는 다 나다지 최초에 통계를 치면 와.
And so, for example, in this context of dealing with the COVID-19 crisis and this pandemic, that we need to be able to see how we can use this to enhance the mind of enlightenment, how we can use this as a means to really help all sentient beings, to enhance our ability to be able to benefit all sentient beings. And in recognizing it also as just another symptom of cyclic existence, it is COVID-19, that we will be always encountering problems and difficulties and diseases like this in the future. And so it behoves us to be able to say, right, I have a much more skillful way of dealing with these issues, and they are that which is going to really fuel my capacity to benefit other sentient beings.
or said the Lord Jesselali is what it is. Ta Kanda Dona to some pages here. Ta Tosam Gombe Jawan Yamjuba, Jam the Ninja Member, Jujebe, Drongam by Jesselali is.
So, verse number 5. When you keep their company, your 3 poisons increase. your activities of hearing, thinking, and meditating decline, and they make you lose your love and compassion. Give up bad friends. This is the practice of bodhisattvas.
간다 존나 두서 다 수다 줘봐야 소소가 너무 두서 공부해도 저거 이나 딜라 딕도스라고 그러와 딕도스 얘네 딜라 데데가 간사라 아니 간사 되네 아니 장르인데 대대 되게 껴도 마고 받체래 소소로 너무 마고 받체래 얘네야 간사 딜라 잠바다 세와디 남야 말라 받체 도대 숙세도 줘고야지 그러와 어떤 다 되네서 소소 가다 존나 독성 폐교체 엔딜라 되네 아니 소소 교삼 공부에 자원은 아니 냠치네 교 자고도나 잠다 닝제 매버 교체에 정은 보자 왔다 되는데 정이 맞다 딕토스그레스 엔 디방구그레스 디방스도 다 가자 로다 가자데 로 투베 뇨몬 자스게 뇨모 젠제 강사 미스 투바 사게 좀 되게 뇨몬 데 교다가 요레스 뇨모다 데베 강사데 교다가 요 말이스 어때 로다 뇨모 슈 전부 요 딜 데데가 뇨모 슈 전부 요건 강사디 아니 데다 자와 슈 전부 잡아이나 아니 라라야 디 냠네 제들 교제 연구도야 레 당고라 거도스 요 거쳐 부르와 이네 거기 뇨모들 먼저 교대 이네 뇨모 데베 강사들 니체고
And so this verse must be clarified in order to make a very important distinction. That is the understanding of, on one hand, that that person, the one who is going to increase mental afflictions for us, of the three poisons, as it points out, attachment, aversion, and ignorance, is regarded as a negative friend. But here, one must make the distinction that it's the mental afflictions that are at fault here, and that the person, not necessarily. And the person we must hold with compassion and love, and never lose that, even to allow it to decrease in any level. But that we see the faults of the mental afflictions that they are espousing, and we can genuinely avoid that and criticize that. And so here, again, it's with regard to the person who's regarding as more of a beginner here as well, to say that when you are associating with such people that are increasing the level of mental affliction, that they are compromising one's hearing, thinking, and meditation, etc., that one can physically distance oneself from them, but at the same time to always make that distinction that one is considering as a fault the actual mental afflictions that are being promoted by that person, but one always holds that person with compassion and love, and that should never falter.
그래서 두번 사제 좀 되게 너무 다다요라 너무 줘야겠어 너무도 대배 가서 다다고 뒤다요 말이야 너무 줘다요 다다요래 대대에서 어떤 가서 투배 제주 속에 아니 뭐다 되는 신체네 그 가사데 줘봐다 가사데 너무도 예와치네 아니 가사데 너무 상황도 좋대도 아니 줘는데 마고에 제도야 아니 딜할 때는 소소 너무 계획도 너무 계획이다 내가 요것도나 아니 다 그 가서 조언해 봐서 진짜 장한테 대고 요래 장한테도 대마다 냠도 강사들라 아니 너무 지 상황 좋아래 좋아 이마이자 딜레 믹스하게 인제도 세와도 되겠지.
And so we can know from the teachings of the Buddha himself that he always made that distinction, that it was the mental afflictions that were the enemy, not the person, never the person. That it was always the mental afflictions that he pointed out where that these were at fault, that these were the enemy, as in kind of the sutras that you will see. And so from our point of view, we have to always maintain that distinction just the same as the Buddha, that when we are associating with those who are kind of really have very strong mental afflictions, that we can be critical of the mental affliction, but not of the person. And if we find ourselves necessary for ourselves to distance ourselves somewhat from those persons, and that we can contemplate the fact that they are under the influence of these mental afflictions, and that therefore we have in our meditations an especially focused compassion for them because of that.
大家人生个呀，这个说那把几个人有嘛的，说个告诉的，告诉的，说这道做吧伊呢，那么都是要派出也是的，特上我说了，那个的，说了那把被就告诉了，请度假被就当年当，你说今天有嘛，说了3个月吧，说了养过几个月吧。 这个判多个月吧，说了这，现在这个哪话这个了，说个特上工作了那个多呢，你大概那些告诉的，特上工作的，想把这人家给了那个多呢，说是读书公费做的，的确差掉了，你得讲的太贵了，那时的人家们说了这个，说了这个给这度假先干的，那就度假等干的，这里人过嘛的，说想把这人家的，说特上工作两年这个了那个多呢，的确一些，然后没就是说的确中国意思，过了哪个这个就要嘛的是，说了3个月到，看我抢到，看我呀，我真的说特上工作的，这个，但是想把这人家给了，那结果我的确差掉了的。
So here it very much paints the picture of somebody who's a definite harmer as the negative friend here. That's one who kind of like desperately, kind of like almost deliberately is increasing the chances of our generating more attachment, aversion, and ignorance, or that they are harming you with extremely dark and negative speech, words, insults, or physically even harming and so on. But it's not just that kind of negative friend that's being referred to here. It can be a friend who is actually speaking very loving words, very very eloquent, very kind in terms of their words, and appearing to be loving and benefiting us. But in fact, they are still that which is promoting attachment, aversion, and ignorance, or that which is preventing us from cultivating our love and our hearing, thinking, and meditating, and our losing, our love and compassion. And so we have to understand, as Ginla says, the enemy, the bad friend, doesn't have to be wearing a pair of horns to be seen as the bad friend. They can come, very kind of looking like they're very friendly and very helpful to us. But there's still this major distraction to our generating the positive qualities, and they are an unwanted, addition to our negative qualities.
他过去的说了，刚才说个3年跟着去吧的，讲把的人家给的，3年跟着去呢，出上过说娘们了，别去当多中华一百一那里，你刚刚，这块我讲要嘛的，他说了哪里多，说个。 讲把的写个身边团呢，3年跟着做吧100亿呢，你讲把的你就公开做单，3年跟着做完呢，车上工作娘来了，别去当多的做完100亿那里，那看看他有嘛，他感觉，这说哪里个？他刚才说哪里个？
So again, I'm saying, all of this, of course, really depends on the individual, that how much strength of mind and training of mind you have anyway. That you can associate with anybody, regardless, if they are not going to cause any of the generation of the 3 poisons to increase, or if they're in no way going to cause any decline in one's learning, meditation, and contemplation, or that they are in no way going to compromise our generation of love and compassion. If that's the case, if we have that strength of mind, then of course we can associate with anybody, and nobody in that case is an enemy. And we can then work on the fact that indeed any kind of a thing we assimilate from them, we simply just transform it into another way of promoting these positive qualities and eradicating our own negative qualities. And so it really, depends on the individual. And so nothing then can be a problem for us.
positive negative positive negative positive negative positive negative
So it all comes down to this amazing kind of a quality, this great mind, elixir type mind of being able to transform either all negative or positive qualities and situations and interactions into Dharma, into what will benefit the mind. And so therefore, anything that is seen as positive, anything that is seen as negative, is all transformed into something beneficial for the development of our mind and the good qualities of that mind. So this is at the heart of it, really. And so this comes down to the unmistaken application of our own mind and our own thinking. And so when we have that ability to be able to apply kind of unmistaken thinking to any situation like that, that is really the beginning of genuine happiness. That is really the beginning of genuine happiness. So that's something that, of course, that we all have to try then and put into practice. Right. So I thought then to leave it there for today and open up again for questions if there are any. No questions? We know it all? Good. Again, I'm saying, when there are no questions, it could be something good, or maybe it could be something not so good. Both possibilities.
아니 다 get 주제데 먼저 가서래. 다 다길 라바네 셰데 다길 라바네 셰천 다 간제 저기 저 가서래. 먼저 미세데 전다 때 맞지. 먼저 다다 가서래. 디기 롱체기 두수 말에. 다다 먼저 유튜브에 두수래. 디기가 유튜브에 두수. 디기가 유튜브에 두수 이봐 인자 다 간제 저기 가서래. 디기가 유튜브에 대 당 지다 되게 그 관계 주에 리바 요한테 이네 진나는 거서 된적을 루된니 미르된 진나 된적을 루된니 왜 갑들라다 다다 먼저 소시 시험아 이제 뒤가로다 지금 된데기 땡기 뒤기 줄다 다음 탐제 캠페인 주지 모두 주에 그 뒤줄에다 다다 시즌 잡는데 아니 뒤 주에 돌아다 먼저 상에 그때 중앙 이바 이나야 땡기 뒤기 주에 줄을 배주 땅 두어지 배주 땅 두어지 왔다 디게 처벌도 디게 처벌이셔. 지금도 코에 디발 가서 내가 그 강에 도와서 들었다. 마기 받잖아. 대대만 말 뒤때만 나는 소속에 다 대적을 루텐다 촐라도다 대적을 됐다 거뒤인데 땡기게 유튜브에 유해버렸다. 다 니마 지금 먼저 대적 루텐다 카테도 그래. 되게 좋은데 치와 예반 남친님의 치외서 취마도 간지자 미병마. 근데 니마 임장다 단다디 먼저 시즌을 와. 시즌을 단다 먼저 가서래 다 같이 디마레 가서래 디기 롱제베 두지 말에 디기 두베기 두지래. 디기 두베기 두지. 이거는 시즌제래 와. 다들 무슨 거 줘봐 지.
So what's most essential is that obviously the importance of really making this life meaningful is at the forefront. And so in the context of that, we must recognize that this is not the season for immersing ourselves in the happiness of this life, but rather it's the season for creating the causes for definite happiness in future. And so it's like making that distinction is extremely important for us. That here, that we have, attained this perfect rebirth of beneficial circumstances and leisures. And so we're at this extremely advantageous position. So we should recognize the importance of making the very most of it, taking the essence of it. And so therefore we shouldn't kind of lose focus by thinking that, this is kind of like my holiday time, I can relax and enjoy the kind of delights of this life. That would be a mistaken focus, that this is not the season for that. This is the season for being able to establish true happiness. And that means laying down the causes now for that pure happiness. And that is so important. And especially when we consider, that the reality of death is always there for us. That death is definite, the time is indefinite. And again, at the time of death, only our spiritual practice is going to be of any use to us. And so that's kind of, in the context even of having this life of beneficial circumstances and leisures, that at the end of it, death is going to happen, no doubt about it. So time is of the essence. We need to make the most of that time. Therefore, we must not waste it, by chasing down the thrills and happinesses of this life, but rather to create the causes for even greater and more definite happiness in the future.
And then 저 남네 제스도 15제 배 가서래 저 가서래 다 저 마두베 때데 개용할 다 남네 저 심볼래 그것도이네 전바의 세신 것임 아니 저 상해 근데 정말 이네 디 아니 가서데 저 셔도 좀 배주당 상해 근데 좋아이네 아니 디기 줄아파 배주당 주바지 그래서 강해시다 매버도네 무튼의 최야부 용 되겠지 무튼의 차이면 더 좀 맞도와 쉬우던데 레몬도와 그것도이네 자바의 닝제디 그것도이네 고급심에 그것도이네 아니 저 가서 농업에 초아되게 간 용용 용해 이 용할 잡아도 시신 것이며 아니 랑제쟁게 그 양의 양도 삼었다 현전쟁 그 연대도 양의 양도 삼었다는 현전쟁 공배다 랑제쟁 숙축다에 안 다음에 생 가서다 그저 라생의 라생의 좀 맞죠 제바체는 라생의 맞죠에 되는데 예반이다 피해 아니 디가도이네 나와내시 나왔다게 두 매삼삼게 그도이네 제시가 소에 어다는데 저는 처음이나 아니 저 처음이나 다가제 저도 좀 찾기로 와 아니 저 선보 용해다 아니 저 가서다 최근에 생기베 저 로티게 공배도 좋다 그도이네 삼다 이제 이제 15제 가서다 저 가서다 리트리트 때문에 15제 대마도 와 이나야 뒤준데네 간데스 통화이네 간데스 나와이네 디가 그가라 딱가제 초주베 총계를 배주당 좋도 와 이나 아니 그 양고 중간에 나라도 깔래제 뭐도 전제 근데 저 용어를 배주당 두고 그때는 딴 거요 용어를 뒤 용어를 배주당한테 숙초다 땅 아니 저 가서다 용어 녀모를 배주다는데 숙청다다는 랑 현전제다 장바의 닝제다 다가내세 유대는 마주 배토라 아니 삼로 숙체스 뭐여기 내수들 삼로 숙체스 잡아이나 아니 다르와 나도 무슨 남편 냠내도 녀모를 먼저 가서데 퀄리티 되게 요 말에 그 뛰는 녀모 배주단 거야 뒤숙청다 다한테 봐.
So also too, to consider that when we talk about, the making one's life a meaningful life and the kind of practice that can guarantee that, it's not rocket science. It's kind of really quite simple. That here, the qualities that we mentioned of having this mindfulness and alertness, bringing that to every moment of our lives as much as possible, cultivating those mental factors so that they're really insightful and very subtle and very constant. And that's here to look into in using them in the context of whatever arises for us, good or bad, that we are very aware and skillful and focused on using either. We don't distinguish between good and bad, that we are both using them to enhance our spiritual practice. And that's here, so whatever happiness, whatever problems arise, kind of look at it with an even mind and say, how is it that I can enhance my spiritual practice because of this straight away? And this is kind of like in order to decrease the mental afflictions on one hand and increase the noble qualities of loving kindness, compassion, patience, etc. on the other. And so this is really the heart of the matter. Then we can look into the self-cherishing attitude, the faults of that, and by seeing the faults of that self-cherishing attitude, to lessen that more and more and more in our interactions in our life. To look into the beautiful attitude of cherishing others and increasing that attitude in our minds, so that we're always ready to benefit others as much as possible, and see the kind of justification of that more and more and more. And so this is then looking into then the non-inherent existence of ourself and a phenomena, and that an understanding that things appear, but we don't have to accede to the way things appear, and that kind of lessens our attachment to all that all phenomena as well. And so this is really what we talk about when we talk about making this life meaningful, and that's looking into the nature of phenomena, and that this kind of like capacity of mind training to be able to use whatever arises for us, good or bad or indifferent, and making that into our spiritual practice, and to enhance our appreciation for all other sentient beings, and indeed at the same time decreasing our kind of reliance on this self-cherishing selfishness. And so here it's kind of trying to make that as persistently continuous as possible, that whatever appears in our consciousness, that we are able to say, I can use that for my spiritual practice. So when we are doing everything we can to increase the dominance of mental affliction in our lives, and at the same time doing everything we can to increase the prevalence of and the blessing of loving kindness, compassion, etc. in our minds. This is talking about making this life meaningful. So it's not like a holiday period for us, but it's kind of this attitude where we really take the essence of life and make it meaningful. So it's not that complicated. It's just really straightforward.
그래서 오늘 너무이나 거두이네 지금 왔다 그 고사 제발 넣어야 돼 와 너무 거두이네 홀리데이 작업을 거두를 배주 당거 열봐 다다도 고사 제발 넣어야 돼 남주 너무 제 삼로 따야 돼 파샤잖아 다 최고 도저 삼로 됐다 너무도 홀리데이 바탕잖아.
So it's kind of like you're saying, Genla, the way that mental afflictions have a kind of like a grip on us, that we think we're kind of like in this holiday mode all the time. So what we need to do is to turn the tables on mental affliction, so that we are using all that time and occasion to turn our attitude towards Dharma, and therefore at the same time give mental affliction a holiday from our reality.
What in the chat, that was a better check, what did it? That what the church and Tamanjay church troops with the same duet, the dealership church troops say German, church to be the same duet. And it Tandanga to the ranch and the Shusambata, some of that is and because the Tagani Shiga to Nomo Chola Shushambote, and the Nomo Shawan Mata or Janapata, same to that chat. What are the church troops? Church troops, Tati, Kutapata, Tovaina, meaningful child. What did it?
And so what do we mean by, one might ask, what is Dharma practice? What is it to practice Dharma? And here is talking about really the essence of it is how we gain control, pacify the mind. And that means that we see the faults of self-cherishing and avoid them, avoid any actions motivated by self-cherishing. At the same time, that we promote all actions that cherish others, that we see how we are under the control of mental afflictions and get out from under control of those mental afflictions and know that we can deal with them. This is Dharma practice. This is controlling the mind. This is making the mind meaningful, making the life meaningful.
Complaints exception. Kelly, what up? So, no more be want to do it. And it's a lemon was our what a table member, what a ticket was a lemasaba, Mitaba, Chevachi Misawa in by what a table the ticket was something. Taring yet the Dungan no one nation, the YouTube nation, Dungan no YouTube, the time of my subject did not ship to be what you are. Ticket no more to get the coach of us or something. Get the coach of us was what did they some time to it. The nigga to get the Yansola, you're not get you to some time to but Taring no head Yakucho to me, Louis, in the children digital senior, or Taring to get to what the Yakucho. That is to get the Yansola, no one get you to some time to Mare. Taring get the children to some time to I'll be what you are. What are Yakucho's on the cow from yet? And Mount Balata did them my own talent, the Duma to El Petri, what the Nella Petri down to wine and it to Sigma.
So, for example, that we can transform our whole attitude with regard to problems, whereby we swap, the kind of the way we are kind of complain about our problems for an acceptance of those problems. And we simply put it into our karmic context to understand that I do not meet with the karma, the results of if I haven't created those causes, and if I have created causes, then they do not disappear of their own accord. Therefore, I must inevitably have created a negative karma to experience this suffering result. And so the only kind of logical, reasonable attitude to take is the acceptance of this particular problem and suffering. And therefore, I have the kind of like the platform then to be able to transform it into a virtue. And so this is the problems that, and so, you can then expand that thinking to go, okay, I accept this problem, I accept this suffering, and that may all the sentient beings who are going through a similar problem, may all of that karma ripen upon me now. I accept that all willingly, so that they do not have to deal with the results of their karmas. And plus, I understand how amazingly fortuitous it is for me to have this problem now, when I am a human being, when I have this intelligence, when I have the capacity to be able to accept it and deal with it and transform it. What if I didn't and then ended up in the lower realms? And because of this, this is something rather fortunate, actually. And so to be able to look into that now and say, it is a fortunate thing that I have to deal with this problem now, because I can use it to enhance my spiritual practice. And so this is the kind of the way we deal with life and make life meaningful.
Well, that is an chance that Cheshin machine that you are the nature of Cheshin, and that the Kangajo that ticket on the church to well, Peju down to that Cheshin. Understanding.
Yeah. So this is when we talk about understanding the Dharma, this is actually what it essentially is. It's that capacity to be able to transform whatever arises for us into its spiritual essence and to be able to use it for a positive result. That's what understanding Dharma is really about.
어디죠? 다들마다 최파 대세잖아. 대세 가리 랍트에 요바자. 강행지 채워도 뭐지마 좀 대대바이나. 다 최마시마 차오로.
And so, this is to contrast between, those who kind of give a very elaborate explanation of the Dharma, but when they meet with problems, they are overcome by those problems. It shows them that there really isn't any essential understanding there because they cannot integrate it into their lives.
그래서 최소의 강행제대 팬도 강행제대 팬마도는 최 말해봐.
And so it's kind of like Dharma is, as it were, tailored for the way to be able to deal with problems. That's what it's about. When there aren't any problems, then there's like, there's less kind of need for the Dharma, isn't there? If there wasn't any problem.
depend on what is the chat that Tango do the Takaja Genesis come there, what did the channel Takaja and what did the channel Takaja ranking there, that Yanjong some stuff. Yanjong, that Yanjong, some was a motor on a Jigo Maribato, or also nearly Kanga Yoe, Tunga Yoe, and the Tata de Casa Nata de Cornota, the Salotawa Yinaya. The core by the Yonga, Horn and Matana. Dita Jawe Tunga, Dile Awe Tunga, Mutu Yoer Wata. He Yonga Dika, Jusama Sagi, call the Tawa to much, Tommy Dosan, calling Yavachuang, and John J. Samlotan, ranking the Pema Tabjela. Then there's some Tamjega to the Sunday Kumar Juking is Nadi, and it's Sechene, and it Luceni than Sechene, and the money but Takara some tall Shane, and it then dig because the digger you didn't Majuba Yeba Lot Takara. And you make him question you so some such. That the day by the time, Munajana take it, that subject Tamja, that time I guess subject around the focus of Dewa to make over read the unit to make not to some needed the subject Tamja to Sunday or Matona Tamito, and Toba chicken, something law. They are new to Toba chicken, so the Lord is Samotane, and the Tavikin question you so something commercial.
So now we bring our mind to our guru in the form of Chen Rezig on our crown on that lotus, sun, and moon disc mandala seat. And we now prepare a seat at our own heart center similarly. And here we can go through the contemplation of renunciation, of really understanding, that these problems that we encounter, this suffering is that we encounter, it's really, we are the denizens of cyclic existence. What more can you expect? This is the nature of this place. And as long as we are here, we're going to not only experience suffering and problems, but also, unfortunately, create new causes again and again to meet with the same misery time and time again. So I must escape from this reality. I must gain liberation. I must gain definite emergence from cyclic existence. And out of that sense of renunciation is established and appears this lotus seat mandala. Now, and this self I'm talking, I must gain liberation. I must gain definite emergence. This I, where is it? What is it? What is its status? And we search for this self that we feel so, objectively existent in the body and mind. We come to the point where we do not find it. We pause at this mere absence of the object of negation, and understanding that the self cannot exist like that, and that definitely we generate then the wisdom from that is the sun disk mandala, and then there's a lack of an independent existence. Really implies a dependence in the way that we do exist. And so here, this striving that we have for definite happiness, we know that all countless sentient beings are similarly wishing for that. They want happiness. They do not want any suffering, but they are bereft of the former and inundated by the latter. And so here I must take on board the benefit of all those sentient beings, and I know that the best and only way to help them efficiently is to attain the state of enlightenment in order to be of best benefit to them. And from this mind of enlightenment arises the moon disk mandalas.
Good. And then that ragi chuola lama cheres come to dinner and so that chen the padets are lava to targeting up with the condition of kuzu so the chaval tamika zupe. So the diba chabakal then the shoe. So the super chaval the tedushina Sanjay Kumato about the chen so called and then that Nipamata my just not being in that and take the logic of Sangaba Chakachi in this kajeting. And then starting because of the Palanga. 아니 저 제레스가 제가 오마니 빼면 잘수 거든데 아니 저 자베가 엄다리 두다리 둘어서 엄들레스 거라제 되네 텐제가 오미 예다마 해도 잡아 다다가다 하고 마샤바나 있어 되는가 수고 어디데 지금 있을 수 없었지.
And so then we make our supplication to the Guru on our crown. O glorious and precious Guru, come take your lotus and moon seed placed here at my heart. Keep me safe in your kindness. Bestow on me the attainments of body, speech, and mind. After the first recitation, the figure moves down through our crown chakra, down through the central channel. At the end of the second, arrives at our heart center. And at the end of the third, is kind of now established steadfastly at our heart center until we attain the state of enlightenment. And we really feel how wonderful that is, quite joyous about that. Now the leaves of the lotus fold over that figure of Chenrezig at our heart center, and they are sealed at the tips by a 5-pronged white vajra, and that the leaves then, that package is surrounded by the mantra of Chenrezig or Mani Padme Hum in a clockwise direction, the mantra of Tara in an anti-clockwise direction, and the mantra of dependent origination in a clockwise direction.
뭐 다들 대라기 다진도 요소 라마체레스 꿀레 외세 트네 라기 기본에 강디가 바로 외세를 트는다 류가 이송의 사회 디바드 디바 디게도 마차 아니 자롱 틀에 교회 디게도 파차네 아니 지금 다니시 다가자 지금 대대 디바 저 바차 저 딱 파차네 다가자 지금 가소래 지금 다제다 알 하도다 탐에가 나시 교양 타자 파장소 사사잖아 아니 어디서 아니 소소 신도 타려 롱디 년랭이잖아 아니 라마체레스 꾸데 렌지 지근잖아 아니 소소 뉴드 라마체레스 꾸로 교소서 소소 신도 타려 선데 년랭자 라마샤자스 그말 보다 라마체레스 그 투데 렌지 지근잖아 아니 소소 선데 라마체레스 그 투라 교소서 랑게 룽아 유서 라마체레스 구소토 고 예메 차소서 아니 네디야 라마체레스 그 셰칼로 교소서 어디 고바셔.
Then the light rays begin to emanate from the figure of Chenrezig within the lotus leaves and permeating through them and really kind of pervading all of our body from the crown down to the soles of our feet. And again, this light has a remarkable capacity to purify all the negativities and obscurations that we have accumulated since the beginning of this time, all negativities of body, speech, and mind. All the faults of our elements are kind of purified, and that the channels, winds, and drops are also cleansed of any stain, and that we have also the imprints of those of negativities are eradicated, and also especially that this adherence we have to ordinary appearance is corrected. And we are seeing everything with pure appearance, and that here, and that then through the combination of my own most subtle wind acting as the substantial cause, with the body of Chenrezig acting as the cooperative conditions, my own body is transformed into the enlightened body of the Buddha. And then through my own most subtle mind acting as the substantial cause, together with the the mind of Chenrezig acting as the cooperative conditions, my own mind is now transformed into the enlightened body of Buddha. And so I see now that I have my body, speech, and mind are inseparable from the enlightened body, speech, and mind of Chenrezig. And indeed, the place that I am in is transformed from its ordinariness into a purified palatial mansion of an enlightened being.
아니 제레스게 시작할 주소 섬사체 다 심지어 탐제게도 산제 고마 주기에서 다 니마들이 주소 다 약을 주소서는 가와고 아니 심지어 탐제 산제 고마 라고바 대두배처럼 소소 개와 가르사바 대두가 소소도 잡아가 유대나 말고 똑바 팔다 잡데 섬사 대때는 대화데 대화 동반데 대돈이스면 시켜서 섬사체.
And then seeing myself as the fully enlightened Chenrezig, I emanate countless rays of light equal in number to all the sentient beings in all the 6 realms of existence. And the light, on reaching them, transforms them immediately into, again, fully enlightened Chenrezig. They also, in the places they are in, they are transformed of all fault and stain and arise as a fully pure palatial mansions of an enlightened being. And then I have this sense of real achievement of, wow, this is really great. That today is the day that I fulfilled my promise to attain the state of enlightenment and lead all sentient beings to that state of enlightenment is itself. And that I understand that that state of enlightenment, all those sentient beings, the merit needed to take them to that state of enlightenment, and me as the agent of that merit, are completely empty of an objective existence and is merely imputed by thought. And that understanding brings forth a sense of bliss, and that transforms into conjoins with voidness, and I abide in the wisdom of knowledge of this voidness. And so this is, of course, we're only operating at the level of aspiration and imagination here. It can't be so easy to simply attain enlightenment like that. Nevertheless, I am cognizant of the fact that this is laying down powerful imprints on mind for it to be made manifest as quickly as possible. And we make that dedication with that spirit in mind. And that here also we make that dedication to kind of understand that I'll now dedicate the rest of my life, whatever is left, to the development of loving kindness, compassion, cultivation of wisdom, and that using whatever happens for me in life, all happiness, all incidents of happiness and incidents of suffering, whether I have a new job or I lose a job, whether I gain kind of profits from my business or I mean a loss from my business, whatever good, bad that arises, may it all be simply generate cause for to be able to enhance those qualities of loving kindness, compassion, and wisdom, and generate this sense of benefiting others. And that may it all be seen as conducive conditions for the enhancement of my spiritual practice.